Hello, welcome to Mind the Wine. This is Brian. In this video, I'm going to be doing a full build on this ST36 movement. In a previous video, I completely disassembled it, but in this one, I'm going to be disassembling it, oiling it, and casing it up. I bought some parts on Amazon. I bought a case, strap, and I'm going to put it all together. I've never oiled a movement, and so this is going to be good practice for me to learn how to do that. In my previous video, I disassembled it, so I went ahead and sped up the video through the process just so that we can get through it a little bit faster. But I've done this several times now, and it's getting quite a bit easier. Alex from the Watch Repair channel suggests that you get to a point to where you can put all the parts in a pile and reassemble it, then you're pretty good with the movement. And I'm about there, so I felt this would be a good time to learn how to lubricate the movement. If you're looking for a cleaner of some sort, definitely check out the Chrono Clean. I'll put a link to that in the description. There's that whole movement disassembled and cleaned. I was actually surprised to find out just how much dirt and lint and stuff was in this movement. They are cheap, and people talk about that. Sometimes they're not the most well lubricated when you buy them, and they sometimes are dirty, but there was actually a lot of just dirt and lint that was in here. So I'm glad that I cleaned it, and I'm going to re-lubricate it, because if it has any issues, well, at least I know that it's my doing and wasn't straight that way from the factory. But at any rate, here we go, putting this movement back together. It's gotten much easier to reassemble these, and just knowing how all the parts work together and how to get everything put in nicely and pretty time effectively as well. So here I'm just checking that train of wheels. Everything seems like it's lined up, so I'll go ahead and screw that down. Again, I have a full link to disassembling this in another video that you're welcome to check out. But again, that's why we're speeding up through this, just so we could get to more of the oiling. And there goes that pellet bridge. Was being a little tricky, but got it in at any rate. Now all the wheels are spinning, and I'll go ahead and tighten that down as well. Alright, and here's the first bit of oiling. Going to be using some HP 1300 on that center and third wheel. And I am using my loops. I don't have a microscope just yet, so I'm doing this the best I can, but I'm taking the approach of less is more. So I'm really trying to not over lubricate these jewels. So I take my time and just make sure that each of them have a little bit, and it's hard because you almost think that more would be better. So that was something I had to kind of fight. Like, is there enough? Is there not enough? But again, I went with the notion that less is more. And I did realize my oiler was dry by the time I got to that second jewel, so I went ahead and just picked up a little bit more for that third wheel. And then here is the Mobius 9010, which is the lightest oil for the fourth wheel and for the escape wheel. Same thing, just lightly putting a tiny bit of oil in those jewels. And so continuing on, putting on the barrel bridge. And now I can add a little bit of oil here as well. I will mention one thing that I didn't do yet is I didn't take apart and clean the mainspring barrel. I don't have a winder big enough for this, and it is brand new, so I felt if there was anything that I could leave be, that it would be that. I did buy a mainspring winder for another project that I have coming up, but for this one I felt I would just leave it and continue on. So I'm putting some HP 1300 here on this barrel to make sure that is lubricated as well and can spin freely. Cleaning up the excess off the oiler with just a little bit of Rodico. And making sure that I don't have any excess there on the top. And now I'm just going to move these wheels a bit to make sure that that oil gets into where it needs to go. And it looks like everything is spinning nicely. And then now I'm going to oil the dial side jewels. Again on that center wheel, a little bit of HP 1300 for that jewel. One thing that's really difficult is just making sure you put the right amount on both sides. And I did my best. I'm hoping that both sides are equal. I think they are though, because when I checked it on the time grapher in different positions, the amplitude was pretty consistent all the way across. So I think that I did get at least an equal amount of oil in each of these jewels on both sides. But time will tell. That's why we practice doing this, and that's why you practice on a cheaper movement. And here goes the 90-10 on that fourth wheel and the escape jewel. And it looks like I got everything. Again, I'm going to move those wheels just a bit just to work that oil in. Again, everything's running free, so I think we're on the right track. Then a little bit more of the HP 1300 around these posts so that I can start putting the winding wheels back into place, the click, and go from there. This, I did watch the Watch Repair channel for kind of guidance on what oil to use where. So I'll put a link to that as well if you are looking to start oiling your own watches. His videos have been really helpful, and it's good to just have an idea of what kind of oil goes where. That little washer got away from me, but it's okay because just oil under it anyway. And continuing on, just add in oil where it needs to go. I'm going to start reassembling the rest of this bridge, putting the wheels in place, putting the click in place. I'll put this little washer back. And here we go with the reassembly, putting these parts back together. I feel like the more I've done this, I've had a lot less slip-ups as far as the screwdriver slipping away from me and kind of scratching up the barrels up top, and feel like I'm getting a little bit better dexterity using the tweezers and tiny screwdrivers, being able to handle all these little intricate parts. I definitely felt like I had less trouble with this one than I have had in previous builds or even just practicing. But again, that's all stuff that comes with time, but I feel like I'm making improvements. I still have a lot of improvement to make, but I'm definitely feeling more confident in handling these little tiny parts. And here, cleaning the pallet fork, here I'm soaking it in just a little bit of IPA, nothing too crazy. I did have some one dip, but since, again, it was pretty new, nothing was really caked on there, not that I could tell, so I felt like some IPA would maybe be just a little bit better here. I do end up using the one dip later in the video. I think I was hesitant to use it at first because, from what I understand, it's a pretty harsh cleaner. Got to make sure it's well ventilated, which I did. But at this point, when I was working on this, I felt like I would use IPA, and it worked just fine. So just cleaning that, letting it soak for a little bit. Not too long, because if you leave it for too long, it could damage the shellac and the jewels will fall out, which I definitely didn't want to happen. So not too long in the IPA, just long enough to kind of clean it up a bit. Put it on that lint-free paper again to dry it off. Making sure there's no moisture left on it. Then I'll hold it with the tweezers here and just blow it off a little bit to really make sure it's dry. And now putting that bridge back in, putting the pallet fork. Put a little bit of wind in the watch to make sure that it's engaging, and it is. Now I will say this was the most challenging part of the build. This is oiling the pallet stones using the Mobius 9415, which is a grease just for the pallet stones. It's such a small space to work in, and without a microscope, it was really difficult to see just how much oil I was putting. Again, I went with less is more, and I really tried to take my time. I'm using the heaviest magnification loupe I have, which is 20 times, so I could at least see more or less what I was doing, and just really taking my time, making sure that I get oil where it should be. And I touched the bridge there, so I used just a little bit of Rodico to clean up the excess so that there's no grease where it shouldn't be. And now I'm just going to work that pallet fork to turn the escape wheel so that it can get some of that grease onto those teeth as well. And then I'll reapply and do the process again so that the entire escape wheel is lubricated properly with some of this 9415. And again, I'm only putting this on one of the stones. As per Alex from the Watch Repair channel, that's kind of how he did it. So this is how I'm practicing. And I'm sure there are many different ways that people do this, but this is the way I'm choosing to try this one. And we'll see how it goes. And you can see that I'm kind of working that pallet fork just so that the teeth turn all the way through. It makes a full rotation, and it completely gets lubricated as it should, spreading that grease through each of those teeth. And again, when I checked amplitude later, it was high, it wasn't low. So I do think that I at least got this in the ballpark of being properly lubricated. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure this would create a low amplitude if this was not oiled correctly. If that's not necessarily true, let me know in the comments. Again, I'm learning and practicing, so all the tips that you have, I'd love to know. Moving on to the dial side, I'm going to start working on the keyless works and putting a little bit of grease here. This is the 9504. This is the SC, which I guess is slightly more resistant to heavy wear parts, and it's just not colored. There's another variant of synthetic that's blue. You've probably seen in other videos if you watch repair videos. This one is just a solid white, but from my research, they appear to be about the same. So I went ahead and bought this. It was a little bit cheaper as well, so it seemed like a good option. But just working on this dial side as well. There goes the canyon pinion, and then putting these intermediate wheels in place where they should go. Continuing on, I'm going to be putting a little bit of HP 1300 at the edge of the stem where it meets the main plate. And then I'll go ahead and add a little bit of that 9504 grease to the remaining parts of the stem where it meets some of the other parts of the keyless works. So you can see there, this is a pretty thick grease, which is meant for heavy friction parts. And as this is turning different wheels and the teeth rub together, metal on metal, I guess this is much better than like a lighter oil, which would degrade a lot quicker. This is meant for those heavy wear parts in a watch. And I can see why it's quite a bit thicker. And there we go, pulling out the rest of the parts so that I can reassemble and add some grease to these as well. I'll be adding a little bit to these teeth. Kind of putting them on that stem. That way I have something to hold them while I add just a little bit of oil to them. It just kind of keeps them steady and keeps them from moving away. Here, this one I'm just using the tweezers, but the same idea, so that when I link them together, they've all had a chance to have a little bit of grease put on them. And then again, I just use the Radico to clean off any extra off of the oiler. Then we'll put that on the stem and start getting these, work them a little bit to get that grease moving between the parts. Now, with anything, if you notice things that are maybe not best practice, or you have tips or suggestions for things that have worked for you, please let me know. I'm open to many different suggestions and learning as many different things as I can with watch repair. I'm still really new to this, so any suggestions you might have, I'd love to hear them. And here goes that yoke, putting that into place. Thankfully, the yoke spring only got away from me once during this build, but I found it relatively quickly. Now you can see add in a little bit more of that grease to some of these parts. Again, they're metal on metal, and so just to save some of the wear and tear, you put a little bit of this. That way you don't get any kind of metal shavings or anything like that in the movement. If that gets into jewels or where it shouldn't be, it could really negatively impact the way your watch runs. And so there's that spring, get that back into place. And then that setting lever. And again, trying to grease in between these parts. I tried to put it in place first and then add a little bit of grease in between the parts when they're already set in place. That way the grease can carry over, and that way I don't put too much beforehand or that it ends up places that it's not supposed to go. Now this was a really nice process to actually work on oiling a watch. It's just something, again, new to learn, something I hadn't done before, and it was nice to work on this. We'll see in time how well the watch runs, but I do feel like I did a pretty decent job at it. I got good readings on the time grapher after all was said and done, so only time will tell. But if not, then I have something that I can work on in the future if it starts to run bad. And the more I do it, the more practice I get. You know, it's all uphill from here. Hopefully, anyway. And so you can see I set that and pulled the crown out just so that it gets the oil onto both positions of where it would be set. And then just to make sure there's no excess grease anywhere, I'm using just a tiny bit of Radico to clean up any of that grease where it shouldn't be. Could attract a lot of debris or dirt or anything like that. So definitely want to make sure that that is not messy on this main plate at all. And it looks like we got that. Now this is one thing that has gotten a lot better with these builds, is working on putting the balance wheel back in place. On the first build, it took me a good while to put it back in, but this one, I really kind of got it set into place relatively quickly. This was the first time for this build attempting to put this back in, and you'll see here in just a moment that it's engaged and properly put in where it should have gone relatively quickly, which was nice. I want to say the first time I did this, it probably took about 10 to 15 minutes. This one took less than a minute to get it set into place. It helps really having the loop to see where the jewel on the balance goes, so you can line it up a little bit easier with the pallet fork. And so you can see it's running smooth, so I'll go ahead and tighten down that bridge. And there it goes. It's spinning nicely, and you can see that it seems like the amplitude, even just looking at it, is running really well. And so now this was a very difficult part to take out the Inca block springs and lubricate these jewels for the balance. I can remember first watching videos from Wristwatch Revival and just thinking how seemingly impossible it was to work with parts that are this small. And here I am attempting to do it and giving it a try. It was hard. This was another part. Like I said, lubricating the pallet stone was one of the challenging parts of this, but this was absolutely the most challenging part of this build, is working with these tiny jewels. And the Inca block was actually the most difficult part. The top one that goes on the balance, actually it fell out, and trying to put that back in was really difficult. I ended up losing one of the pieces, and then I pulled one off of my spare movement that I had broken previously, so thankfully I had a spare part, but then I ended up breaking that one. And luckily I found the original Inca block spring, and so all was well in the end, and I do eventually get it put back in. Lubricating the jewels was not too bad. Using my 20 times loop, I could see how much oil I put. It was just a matter of getting it set back into its setting well. That took a little bit of time, but with a little bit of patience, I do eventually get it. And so you could see here, just adding a tiny bit of oil. One thing that I struggled with at first was I was not using the tweezers to hold the jewel in place. So as soon as I would put oil on it, it would stick to the oiler. And so I realized if I hold it with the tweezers, then it wouldn't do that. And so you can see I got the oil set where it should be, and then it got into its setting exactly as it should. And I'm just checking to make sure that the oil is in the center of that and not off to the sides, and it looks like I got it right where it should be. And so I'll go ahead and put this back. And then here, what I did to actually put that Inca block spring back was I put it into the Rodico so that it didn't move. With the tweezers, I was having trouble with it going all different directions. This one, the Rodico kept it steady enough that I could put it in at the angle I needed and it wouldn't move on me. So I actually just shoved it into the Rodico, left the base out, and I set it back in. Again, I don't know how correct or incorrect it is to do this, but it's what I did to make it work. This is my first time actually removing these Inca block springs and these jewels. So if you have better suggestions, again, please let me know, and I'll work on those in the future as well with getting these set. But this one, these springs really tested my patience. It was quite difficult, but the feeling of success that I had after actually putting it back together was it was awesome. And that's what makes it totally worth it to have those kind of successes. It was really hard. I did wind down the mainspring. You saw it running a minute ago, but in order to make sure that I didn't drop these jewels inside of the hairspring or anything, I had let the mainspring down to do the top side, just so I didn't drop anything in it and it damage while it's moving. And this jewel, this is actually from the bottom side of the movement, or the dial side. And so I'm doing the same thing there, adding a touch of oil, using the tweezers to hold that jewel in place, and making sure that I get it set, and then I'll put it back in its setting. And again, I'm doing this on the lint-free paper just to make sure that they don't get any kind of dust particles or anything in between. And there we go, get that set on the jewel, and they should stick together through capillary action. And there it is. So we'll put this back into its jewel setting. And so I'm just using very sharp set of tweezers to open up this Inca block spring, and then I'll go ahead and drop that in. It's set into place just like that. And again, I could remember watching videos just thinking, man, that is so impossible. And again, here I am doing this, and it was a struggle, but at any rate, it's pretty cool to actually be doing this kind of work. and just using the tweezers there to push the Inca block spring back into its setting. Eventually I want to get a microscope so that I could show you a little bit more in depth, in better detail, but I'm not there yet. We'll get there. So I'm just cleaning a little bit of just dust that maybe got on the top there. And now I'm going to start actually working with the build. I felt like I got it all oiled correctly. Here's the dial I bought. I got this off of Amazon, and the case was from Amazon as well. Same with the hands. It's obviously a Big Crown, IWC Big Crown homage. At least that's what I believe these to be. And it's a big, it's a big movement, so a big case at 44 millimeters. And here we go, just putting that hand in place. Using a booger sucker of all things. It's not used, it was brand new, but I figured it worked all the same as some of the more fancy watch building specific blowers. For me right now it's working just fine. And here's the second hand. For inquiring minds, if you're wondering about the watch on my wrist here, it's a Hamilton PSR. It's one of my favorite watches. Super cool. There we go. Got the second hand on. Again, just making sure there's no dust or anything under the dial. And the second hand, this thing was really tricky. For whatever reason, I just struggled getting it lined up with the pivot. It's very small. But again, I was also really trying to be delicate to make sure that I didn't break the pivot on the inside. In the last video with the Seiko, it lined up a little bit easier than this one. This is a sub-second dial, so it doesn't go through the middle post. And for whatever reason, I was just challenged putting this on. And you can see right there, I was not careful enough with my tweezers, and I poked a tiny bit of the loom out. And so there's a little tiny hole now in the second hand, which ended up really bothering me. And I didn't quite catch it yet. So I fiddle around with this for a little bit. And it just takes some time. Went forever. And finally, I realized that I had poked a hole in the loom. And I went ahead and I put it back on anyway. But here's about where I realized that there was a hole in there. And it just bothered me. So what I ended up doing, and I'm kind of glad it worked out this way, was I ended up using the small second that came on the practice style. It's just a little tiny gold seconds hand. But against the black and against the other hands, I think it actually came out looking really nice. You'll see that here in a minute. I didn't record doing that, but you will see in just a little bit that I ended up using another second hand. I just couldn't do it. Maybe I'll end up getting some loom and learning how to reloom hands in a later video. But for right now, I had everything I needed still. And here's that crown. This is starting to figure out how much I'll need to cut off so that I can get it flush with the case. All right, and here you can see that I have that gold second hand as opposed to the one that came with the kit that I got from Amazon. So you can see just the difference there. But to me, I actually like the way it looks. I think it looks really slick. And even if you are using the loom, chances are that you're not all that worried about the seconds. If you're just trying to read the time and it's kind of dark, reading the hands is probably enough, especially with a watch like this. The water resistance is only 3 atmosphere anyway, so you're not going to be doing anything too crazy with this. I would imagine it's more like a dress watch, in which case most of those don't have loom on the hands most of the time anyway. So for me, I like the way it looks, and happy accident. If it would have worked out with the other hand, that would have been great too, but at least I had a plan B. And so there we go, putting the stem in again just to see where we're at. There's still space in between, so I did not get it cut far enough, so I'll have to take that out and shape it again. Make sure that it is a little bit shorter so that it'll sit flush with the case. And one thing I kept doing was just making sure that every time I would put it in, that I would be able to engage the watch and things would turn as they should. So it is winding, the hands are moving, and parts are still working as they should. This is my first time, again, assembling a full watch, you know, including disassembly, lubrication, and everything else. So I do want to make sure every step of the way that things are working as they should, and I'm not skipping parts or missing things, which some of that did happen naturally, of course, but I'm still doing my best to make sure that I am doing my due diligence with this. And so taking that crown out, again, the crown and stem, so I can keep reshaping it, cutting it off a little bit to make it shorter. And I obviously haven't put any Loctite yet. That way I can still work on this. So there's the stem. And then just doing a little bit of sanding here to make sure that it's not burred, and it'll work on the crown. Again, it'll be able to screw on just right. You saw in the last video, there's nothing very special about it. I'm just using a nail file right now. It worked enough for this. Just using a little bit of light pressure, making sure that there's no jagged edges on the stem. And I had repeated this process several times. And there you can see there's still a tiny bit of space, so I'll go ahead and do it again. And here we go. Let's see where we're at. Okay, you can see there, it's about flush with the case. So I'm going to tighten the screw down so that I can see that it engages everything properly. And there you go. You see that it's winding. Everything is working as it should. It's also flush with the case. And if you saw my last video with the Seiko, again, I take off less than I think I need to and just kind of slowly work to make sure that I don't cut the crown stem too short. I did have an extra crown stem on hand if that were to happen, but because I took my time, thankfully, I didn't need to use it. And you can see there, everything is about as it should be. Still running well. Now look at this gasket and just make sure to lubricate it a little bit to help with the water resistance. Nothing fancy. This I just bought from Amazon. Is a couple bucks. For this project I figured it would suffice. And we'll put that on the case back and start reassembling it. And that movement through the exhibition case back just looks gorgeous. Again, it's a super cheap movement, but it's really pretty to look at, especially with the case as big as this. You really get to see everything, which is cool. With some of my other watches that are smaller, with the exhibition case back, you can't really see the pallet fork. I mean, you can see the balance wheel, but on this one, you could actually see the pallet fork and the escape wheel working together and just all the different parts running, and it's really cool to see. It's a little too big for my liking at 44 millimeter, but aesthetically, it's really cool to look at. It looks like I got it all back together. One thing I forgot was to actually add the movement holder clips, which you can see there and there. So I got those put in, made sure they were secure. I realized that the movement was a little bit wobbly inside, and so I had to put those in place. And then again, just putting that case back on the watch. And then I'll use the ball here just to make sure that it's as tight as it needs to be. And one final check, make sure everything is still working, and it is. And there we go. It's really a cool looking watch. And here working these spring bars off so that I can put a strap on it. I had an old, well, it's not really old because it's not used, but I haven't used it. But once I put it on a watch at one time, but an old Ritchie leather strap, which again was also bought on Amazon, and I had just been holding on to it because I only have one watch that has 22 millimeter lugs, which I currently have a bracelet on anyway. So this was laying around, and I figured this would be a perfect watch to put it on. Since the dial's black, the black leather really matches the aesthetic of this build anyway. And it has some orange stitching, which I think looks kind of cool against the dial. And there we go. There's that Seagull full build, sort of an IWC homage. And that gold second hand, to me, really pops against the black dial. And I'm really happy with how this came out. I think it was super cool. All in all, everything was less than $100 if you put it all together on Amazon, or maybe right around the $100 mark. And I took it a step further by cleaning and re-lubricating it. If you wanted to build one like this yourself, you could just buy the parts and assemble them for, again, right around $100, if not maybe just a hair more. But anyway, tell me what you think about this build. As always, thanks for watching. If you have comments or suggestions, put them in the comments. And thanks. We'll see you next time.